Let's get this started. Welcome to Gate Crashers. I'm Dan.
And I'm Jake.
And today we're joined by Daniel Kraus. You may know his writing from the Autumnal, The Living Dead, or his work on The Shape of Water, or many other books that he's worked on. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Very glad to have you. If you didn't know, we are actually very hard-hitting journalists. Even after the name change, we like to start it off with like a quick right hook to everyone we interview. So,
fantastic.
What's your favorite sandwich?
Oh, a favorite sandwich. Oof, that is a tough one. I do like a good sandwich that has I'm not so fixated on the meat part of it, but that has bacon and avocado. It's such a great match. And I will also add that so many sandwiches can be improved by using cinnamon raisin bread. Sandwiches that you wouldn't think would make sense. Use cinnamon raisin bread and it just elevates it.
Sounds about right.
On like a ham and cheese? Are you saying?
Yep. I don't know about it. Depending on the cheese, but
yeah. All right. I guess I'm gonna get raisin bread the next time I go to the store and try this.
Yeah, it's amazing. It adds some sweetness to the salty. It's very good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan
cinnamon
of that,
makes
sure.
everything better.
Mm-hmm.
This is a scientific fact. All right. So for Autumnal, what made you look at a pile of leaves and think, I could make those spooky? What inspired that?
Well, I remember I was on an email thread with some friends and we were talking about, I think we were talking about horror novels. So it wasn't actually that far flung from what this ended up being. And someone said something about leaves and I think because maybe we were on the topic of horror, I suddenly had this idea about leaves being like footprints because they kind of look like paw prints, certain kinds of leaves. And I thought,
blowing my mind right now, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Never
I know.
thought about it.
If you imagine them as like paw prints, it's pretty instantly kind of scary. And I thought, well, what if leaves were sort of like stepping stones across a river, but they were leaves across a lawn, and that was the path that something could take to get to you. If there were enough leaves that led to your house, something could walk across them and get in. And I thought that was a great idea. And like most of my ideas, it had to simmer for a really long time. So, I've several books of mine that are based on ideas that I thought about for literally decades. This one didn't last that long, but it was a few years before I could figure out what to do with that idea. And I'd always been a really big fan of folk horror, and I'd always wanted to do something that sort of was an homage to The Wicker Man and stuff like that. So eventually it came together, but I think leaves are scary. I mean, they're everywhere. They move. They kind of move like little crabs or spiders, and they're dead. On top of everything else, they are dead. So I think there's all sorts of creepy things about leaves, but we always kind of relegate them to the sidelines. They're sort of set dressing for October and Halloween, but I think they can be scary in their own right. They hide things.
I never really wanted to think of leaves as spiders, but now it's going to be forever.
Mm-hmm.
They always that's where the spiders live.
Yeah,
too, so it's like you're getting double.
Also, the hiding, like the leaves hiding stuff, like there's always that one time where you jump into the leaf pile and you're like, there's going to be something pointy at the bottom of this thing and I'm going to regret my life.
See, I watched a video the other day of someone putting a bucket of ice water like a big old tub of it and then trick someone into falling into it, just all hidden in leaves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it happened to me, if it's just sort of a story I heard, but I always think about jumping into a pile of leaves, and one, there's going to be like a pitchfork in there and you can get impaled, or two, there's something dead in there. You know, there's like a dead vermin of some sort.
I'm just going to avoid leaf piles, probably.
Yeah, there's no good reason anyone needs to be jumping into leaf piles. That's some sort of pastime from the 50s that we need to let go of.
Yeah, and I mean, after the story especially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your inspiration behind the characters of the Autumnal? What helped you craft your lead cat and her personality?
Well, I mean, once I sort of decided I wanted to do something along the lines of folk horror, I wanted that sense of somebody coming back home, and I immediately sort of latched on to the idea of a woman in an urban environment who has to, for some reason, flee from that urban environment to a rural environment, and it's just sort of the character that spoke most to me in that is a woman who is being sort of beaten down, literally and metaphorically, by life, like just being too difficult and too onerous. And she's a city girl, but she had to, at this point, just flee and hope that this country home that's suddenly been given to her in a will was at least a place she could hide out and lick her wounds for a while. And because of the plot that had started to formulate, I knew it was going to be about families in some way, sort of passing through the generations. And so whether it was, the main character was a man or a woman, it was going to be, a lineage, a father, a man and a son, or a mother, a woman and a daughter. So for other various reasons, it made sense to me for that to be a mother and her daughter, and then the mother's mother, and to have there be sort of these shock waves that go back and forth and these misunderstandings across the generations. And I wanted both Kat and her daughter Sybil to be urban in a kind of recognizable way, in that they're tough. They maybe have some physical wounds on them. They're fighters. They're people who wouldn't fit in necessarily. She's got a bunch of tattoos. They're just people that wouldn't fit in naturally in this quaint little small town. And I wanted that kind of friction.
And you touched on this a little bit in your answer. So the quiet horror of family and the trauma that can come with it, mixed with this eeriness of the unknown with the leaves and things like that, is abundant in the Autumnal. How do you think that brings a sense of, how do you think that sense of realism builds on the horror for the reader as they can kind of relate to those characters?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. There's all sorts of horror out there, obviously. For this, I wanted to do something very mature. I wanted to be kind of sophisticated, very adult. I think the quiet, and then I think quietness kind of goes along with that. Like if you're trying to amuse a 12-year-old reader, you're going to probably want to bring the razzmatazz pretty quickly. But if you're dealing with maybe more seasoned adult readers who are eager for kind of more character content, I think that they're up for a quieter build. And the trick is getting them to the trick is giving them enough to feel that there's a build coming. And the Autumnal definitely has a build. It's kind of quiet for the first couple, maybe 3 issues, and then it exponentially ramps. And by the end of it, it's just, it's as crazy as anything. It's balls to the wall horror at the end. but I like that. I think it fits with the theme of the book. I mean, the idea is that Kat and Sybil are welcomed in this community, and they slowly begin to sort of like it and find comfort in it. And that's a slow process. That's a slow, gentle process when you begin to feel comfortable in a new space. That's something that doesn't happen in, 3 pages of an issue. So it felt right for this kind of story.
Sorry, I'm going to go a little off script with these questions, but with the town of Comfort Notch, what inspired you to make it kind of that idealistic, quote unquote, American dream like town? Because I know that Sybil does comment on how all the kids look pretty much the same, and there's not much diversity in the town. Was that important to you going into this?
Yeah, that was an element of it. She comments that everyone's white, and coming from a city, it just confuses her. Sybil's only been in Chicago her whole life. So suddenly they're out here in this kind of New England town, and everyone kind of looks the same. And I think she picks up on that as, her urban radar picks up on that. Like, this is weird. Like, this is not the world as I know it. And I think that would replicate the experience of a lot of urban people going to the small town. Like, there's something inherently creepy for an urbanite to go to a small town and everyone's the same thing. In America, most small towns, it's going to be white. Everyone's white. And everyone kind of dresses the same, and everyone, I don't know, worships the same. There's a sort of homogeneity. Am I saying that right? Homogeneous worlds can be very unsettling. But it's interesting because the people who live there, that homogeneous world feels comforting. So it depends on what angle you're coming from it. I'm coming from it from an angle where I grew up in a small town for my entire up through the end of high school, and I then moved to a big city, and I feel like I am definitely someone who belongs in the city. And small towns, they creep me out, and I can say that with some authority because I spent my entire childhood and adolescence and teenhood in a small town, and I still think there's something creepy about it. There's an isolation, there's a certain way of thinking, and it's tough to break free of majority opinion when you're in a small town. You just don't have anywhere to turn. I think it's easier now with the age of internet, but that's not enough. It's always going to be creepy.
Yeah, you can only connect so much through a telephone. When I was writing the review of the Autumnal, I'm never going to say it right, for CBR, I was writing this one line about that particular scene, and I called it pumpkin spice gentrification.
Yeah, right.
And I got they were like, I don't know if that's going to work. And I was like, oh, that's fine. But switching from leaves to zombies. You just released The Living Dead, which is a George A. Romero novel that he never got to finish before he passed away, that you have stepped in to expertly finish and co-author. How did you approach writing a zombie story of this specific nature? Did you try to ensure that there was some sort of message that Romero often put in his work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of that was there in the manuscript that he left. And that stuff was just baked into his DNA. So a lot of his concerns about social issues and injustices, that's all there. But I really grew up on Romero in a very profound sense. The first movie I remember seeing was Night of the Living Dead. And I watched it over and over and over as a kid. And it became part of my DNA too. So again, I grew up in a small town, but watching Romero's movies, he had such a wider, expansive, more liberal viewpoint that really affected me. And I think made me able to see beyond the kind of conservative surroundings that I lived in. So a lot of that stuff is baked in me too. And so the gaps that were missing in the novel that I had to fill, more or less, and some of them were small and some of them were huge, Yeah, I was. It was very important to me to keep his Romero's concerns always present, but they've kind of become my concerns too. So it wasn't that big of a leap. It's not like I was trying to emulate the viewpoint of someone I disagreed with. You know, we were very simpatico in our beliefs and our likes and our dislikes, and our politics and all that stuff. So it was a pretty natural fit in that way. I mean, it was an extremely complicated project, in a lot of ways the most complicated project I've ever worked on for various reasons. But that element of it was relatively straightforward.
Yeah, I actually got to recently start it. I haven't had a ton of time to dig into it, but what I've read so far is incredible. I'm so excited to actually get down to read it this weekend.
Oh, great.
So with that, I have a side note that's pretty much just for me. For the book, did you choose what kind of paper it was? When I started touching these pages, it's like, oh my God, this is like the nicest book I've ever felt.
Well, I love that question because no one ever asks. They don't ask much about the physical books, and editors put a lot of consideration into the physical elements of the book, the cover, the pages, the hue of the pages, the font, and the kerning of the typeface. There's a little thing, I can't remember what the name of it is, but if you look at the top of a book, kind of at the top pages of a book, like the book's a cube, the top facing, and right in the binding, sometimes there's a little cloth. It almost looks like a little caterpillar. Not all books have those. That's got a special name, and they can be all sorts of different colors, and they're an additional expense. So all these other things, all these elements to a book cost more money. If you have any raised lettering, there's all sorts of different textures for the book jacket. So usually you don't have a whole lot of say in that, and they just kind of come out and they have this sort of default settings. For this one, they did a nice job. We decided on what is called the deckled edge. So it has that old-fashioned rough book edge. At least the US version does. And it's funny because whenever a book comes out with deckled edges, there'll be people on Amazon who will rate the book one star, saying that their pages are all screwed up, not realizing that's either they're supposed to look like that. It's actually a good thing, not a bad thing. And I think, and certainly there's differences in page stock. Yeah, some of them are glossier, some are almost not moist, but there's like they're like thicker and damper. So all I can say is they chose a nice page stock and
beautiful page stock.
And yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with particularly the US version of the book. I think it's just a really lovely production all the way around. And the title page has color on it, and you almost never see that. There's a couple blotches of like red blood on the cover page. And that's really rare.
I started for some reason I've just been reading more prose for myself and not like making it into content anywhere. And I just finished Devolution by Max Brooks. And at the end, it told you what typeface they used. And I was so excited about that. I don't know why, but it was just so exciting to like see that little detail and like get a kind of closer look at like what the thing is.
Yeah, a lot of books do that. I think more books don't, but I've read plenty of books that the final thing in the book is it tells you what typeface it is.
Yeah, maybe I don't always get to the ends.
Yeah, it's also possible sometimes it's hidden in the sort of front matter.
So with the Autumnal and The Living Dead being at two very different ends of the horror spectrum, how did you approach writing those aspects to make them distinct?
Well, it was pretty easy in this sense because they're both different mediums. I think when you're dealing with two novels, you really do have to pay attention to that. You know, I'm pretty prolific, so I have to take extra steps to make sure one novel doesn't feel too much like another. But in this case, the Autumnal is a comic book, and so just the structure of that, the way you're working on a document that looks different and is not prose, really, in that sense of the word. It's a lot more stage direction. It doesn't feel anything like it. And so it has none of the flow of a novel. It's much more, there's something much more algebraic, I guess, about comic book writing, because you're really dealing in units of information. How many blocks of information on this page, how many blocks on a spread, how do the blocks transition when you turn the page? And you're always dealing with that sort of finite space, which is you don't have in novels, you don't have in screenwriting. It's very unique to the comic book format. And I think, and I know for me anyway, the form and the shape of how you're working on something drastically affect how you or how the actual writing goes. It affects the art of it. In the same way that if I were to suddenly decide I'm going to write my next book in Comic Sans, that would affect the writing. Like there's all these tricks you can do to kind of mess yourself up. And I do them because I'm prolific and I want to continually jar myself out of my comfort zone and do little tricks and challenges and restrictions to make myself have to work in a different way than I have before.
That's very interesting to hear, that you're always pushing yourself to try to put limits on what you can do so you can do more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it. Some projects are just different by their very nature. You know, you may be writing in a really peculiar first person voice. You know, that's going to change everything. But if you're writing, you know, just another third person novel, I definitely put up roadblocks and limitations and do things that make me have to work harder or work differently.
So you did something similar with The Shape of Water, because the book and the film were both released around the same time, but took two approaches and two different mediums to the same story. I know that you co-wrote with Del Toro, but did you try to keep the visions distinct for the mediums, or were you trying to tell one concise story?
They're distinct. I think the story beats are very, very similar. But it's the only project I can compare it to is 2001, in the sense that Arthur C. Clarke published the novel of 2001 pretty much on time with Kubrick's movie. And so plot wise, they're very similar, but the content's a little different and the delivery's a lot different. So they by design are going to kind of have their own styles and their own feels, but telling the same story.
And you both you co-wrote Troll Hunters as well, which is one of my favorites. What was it like working on a collaborative project like that?
That was really cool. That was really fun. I was coming off a book. Troll Hunters with Guillermo was my fourth book, and I was coming off a book called Scowler, which to this day is the most problematic book I've ever written, as far as me having written it. It was a very, very difficult book for all sorts of reasons we don't need to get into, but it was very, very difficult and painful in some ways. And suddenly I was invited to, by Guillermo to co-write this Troll Hunters, which was so much more lighthearted than Scowler and anything else I had written. So I guess in a sense, it was a tiny bit out of my comfort zone because it's so much more lighthearted. But it was exactly what I needed. And it was just so fun. It will always go down as one of the most pure fun projects I've ever done. And it came right when I needed it in life. It was just like after the I don't know, the hard burnt meat that I'd been feeding on for 3 books. Suddenly it was like just eating marshmallows. It was really, really, it felt exuberant to do. It was a good experience.
And how was it writing with him?
It was good. He that project stands unique in all my books in that it wasn't my idea. He had this whole thing planned and mostly plotted, and was looking for a co-author to actually execute it with him. So I was coming into a project that was very well organized before I read a word of the outlines for it. So it was a totally new experience, and one that is not new anymore, and I've done such things since then. But it was great. It was the first time I was collaborating with anyone, and so it was fun. It was just really fun to collaborate with somebody who he was clearly having fun with the material. And I think at that point I was missing that a little bit. I was dragging myself over the coals of some really dark stuff. And he kind of reminded me that there's joy to be had out there and good times to be had. And warmth and optimism. And I think that, that's what I came away with most of all in Trollhunters and from just Guillermo in general, was to re-embrace optimism. Like, things don't have to be all doom and gloom. Like, let there be hope and let there be laughter and all these things. And he also has a much more, at that point anyway, had much more of a mindset that was, I think, more commercially palatable than the stuff I've been doing. Mm-hmm. And, when you come from sort of, the fringes, in my case, just rural Iowa, sometimes you have a tendency, especially when you're young, to kind of look down on anything that's too commercially based. But that was another thing I learned on Trollhunters, was when you're working in, kind of standard classic 3-act structure and stuff, there are lessons to be learned there. And again, it's like I was saying, like, this was another example of me having to work in a different realm, in a different way with a different structure. And it taught me a lot.
That story makes me very happy.
Good.
That feels refreshing. So with having worked on collaborative projects before, was coming to the medium of comics where everything is done as a team easier for you?
It was just very different. I'd done these collaborations, but mostly I was, working alone. And the comics is it's just so much more collaborative than even, two authors collaborating. It's like, in theory, if two authors were collaborating and one was kind of not pulling their weight, the other one kind of pick it up and write more. Both comics, like, it's not like, I mean, if the letterer doesn't show up, you don't have a comic. Everyone has to do their part. So it's been just a tremendous experience that I've really, really loved. It's been one of the great eye openers for me. I love working with, especially with collaborators who aren't doing what I'm doing. It's probably kind of like filmmaking or something, like I'm working with, not like I'm working with another writer in this case. I'm working with an artist and a colorist and a letterer, and they're all bringing completely different skill sets to it. And so there's not even any sense of, me and another writer are kind of duking it out in a good way to try to figure out, what is this story about? It's really me doing something and then just letting it go, and then just being able to sit back and have fun as everything else happens. For the Autumnal, I wrote all the issues up front. I wrote all 8 issues before anyone else was involved. So it really, my job was essentially done by the time that any art was being done. So mostly I've been able to just really sit back and relax and just watch all the pieces coming together. And that's super, super enjoyable.
Very interesting.
Well, were you a comic book reader before this?
Not a big one, no. I mean, I've become one over the years, but I did not grow up with comics at all. I don't know what it was about this town that I grew up in, but I don't think it had comics. It was a small town, and there was only one kind of, not even a bookstore, it was more like a gift store, but a place that had books, and I don't believe they sold comics. I didn't have comics. None of my friends had comics. It just wasn't a factor in my life. So I don't have any of these like deep feelings or nostalgia for various comic characters. They didn't exist for me.
That sounds scarier than Comfort Notch.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, add one wrinkle to that though. At some point, my mom went to a different town, a bigger town, and she bought a pack that had 3 comics in it. And this was bizarre because I'd never had comics. And this pack had the last 3 issues of Marvel's Secret Wars. And so the only comics, I grew up with exactly 3 comics, and those were issues 10, 11, 12 of Marvel's Secret Wars. And I read those issues over and over and was so utterly fascinated by them, partly because I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was the end of that series is really bizarre and metaphysical, and I didn't know why all the characters were there. I didn't know who they were, what they had done. I just knew that suddenly crazy things were happening, and Doctor Doom had become a god, and we were in deep space for some reason. And it was just so bizarre. And that's the thing that doesn't happen anymore. But back then, pre-internet, pre-cable, I guess, you didn't always get the full story of things. You would see a movie when it was on TV, and you just catch the end of it, or you just catch the beginning of it before you had to go to bed, and you had to kind of make up and kind of ruminate over what was the rest of the story here. And so I feel like not having the whole story of Secret Wars made it better in a way, because I had to puzzle over it, and it was so intriguing. How did these characters get to this spot? So no, I wasn't a big comics reader at all. I was not a comics reader at all. And then over the years, I've gotten into it some, and more than that, read more graphic novels than comic books. But just over the last year, just have been diving in and just. It's exactly what you'd think. It's me saying, oh my God, there's this whole incredible world. I'm just sort of like dazzled. I'm just kind of speechless with all the incredible content that I've never read.
That kind of idea that your brain is filling in the rest of those blanks is something I honestly have been thinking about a lot this week. We watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre last week, where a lot of the violence isn't shown. It's your brain filling in the blanks. And I've just been thinking about that in context of like, when you don't have the rest of a story, you can make it all yourself. So that's that. Picking up Secret Wars, like as someone who's read comics for my whole life, that's like catching a firecracker. That's a very interesting way to get in. But so when I got these, Jake had to write his questions first, and I got to it, and I found one. I had to edit it down a little bit. So Jake specifically wants to know if the amphibian man from The Shape of Water would be his friend. As someone who has written the character, if you say yes, that does make it canon.
Yes.
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 Go, Jake.
Good. I assume after the whole story, he's just hanging out in the Chesapeake Bay, and which is right outside my window. I can just go there any moment.
He's your friend, but let me also say this, that particularly in the book, which goes inside of his head, he is sort of a friend to everyone. So I don't want you to feel too special here. He is your friend.
Good.
That's great. But he is connected to all living things, and feels a kinship to most of them. So consider yourself as part of a not exclusive, but very beloved family.
It's the best answer I've ever heard. Oh yeah, no, yes, but like you're not special.
Oh, that's what I've heard my whole life.
Keeping them humble.
Oh, they threw us away. Did you have a teddy bear as a kid? What was its name? And
Yeah.
Did you throw it away?
Right. So this is my new series for kids, kind of. That's about it's a very dark trilogy about kids, teddy bears. I did not have a teddy bear, but I had a blankie, which served the same purpose, and I had it too long. I had it what I'm as a kid assessed was too long. And I was aware that I had it too long, and I probably got to the point. I wasn't in high school, but I was somewhere in elementary school probably. But I felt like a self-imposed pressure, like I'm too old for this. I shouldn't have this blankie anymore. And I remember the day I put it away, like I didn't, I did it myself. I folded blankie up and I put them in the storage room. And I vividly remember that, like the same way you remember like a pet dying or something. And and even now talking about it, I could talk about like deaths of people I know. But for some reason I talk about the day that I sort of mercy killed my blankie, and I can like feel the emotion. I feel like almost tearful about it. There's something about that kind of thing, like these inanimate objects that we become so close to, and the idea of getting rid of them it has a weird power to it. Like there's something about it that just feels so poignant, I guess, because unlike deaths of things, it really marks the difference. It really marks that transition between stages of your life, like between being a child and an adolescent or something like that.
Wow, that is some metaphorical. Wow, you're bringing the heat on these ones.
I guess so.
So if eat with your blankie, what made you want to jump to talking about the lives of humble teddy bears?
Well, I don't think a story about a bunch of blankies would have. It just seems like it would be weird. They don't have faces. It'd be hard to do. But I really wanted to do an epic journey book that was, journey in the ways that the hobbits go on a journey or something. But my one of my favorite books as a kid or a teenager wasn't Lord of the Rings. It was Watership Down. And one of the reasons I just adored Watership Down was because it was this sort of epic Lord of the Rings type journey, but it was done with the most vulnerable beings possible, these little defenseless rats. The fact that they were able to make such an incredibly rich story with rabbits, it really impressed me more than anything. And so I'd always wanted to do an homage to that. And so for years, as is my tendency, I dwelled upon a story about teddy bears. And is there some sort of journey teddy bears could go on that would let me sort of have this experience as a storyteller, but in a different way. These teddy bears are more vulnerable than rabbits even. But something that I stumbled upon pretty early was there's something really, as somebody who writes dark stuff, there's something really tantalizing about writing about teddy bears, that you can sort of tear them apart. If I was writing about rabbits or little kids, I can't just pull an arm off and gouge an eye out and just keep going. But with teddy bears, because they're just made of
stuffing.
Yeah, they're just made of stuffing. So you can do all sorts of things to teddy bears, and they can just keep on ticking. And that really helped me with the overriding metaphor of the trilogy, which is kind of an accelerated look at growing up, from being born completely innocent to becoming a young adult or an adult. And the fact that we carry our wounds with us, and with a creature that doesn't heal, like a teddy bear, it made that seem very palpable, very visceral to me, that when these characters got wounded, they were stuck like that. They would always be wounded. And I drew these pictures of all the teddy bear characters, and whenever their ear got ripped or their arm got gnawed off by a rat or something, I would draw those on so that I could keep a track of all their wounds, which were really signs of them maturing and growing up.
Holy moly.
Well. Whew. It's just.
And say you're planning a full trilogy for this story?
Yeah. It's called the Teddy Saga, and They Threw Us Away is out now, and the next two will be out, at yearly intervals. So the next one will be out next fall.
That is such an interesting metaphor, especially now knowing the Blanky story and the pain that you still feel today. I'm sorry, but
it's okay. I have a worse story. I had a friend in high.
Here we go.
I had a friend in high school who had a Blanky. Well, he didn't have it when I knew him, but he had a Blanky, and he told me that his dad at some point judged he was too old for a Blanky, and every day cut a little bit more off the Blanky until it was all gone.
What?
Isn't that terrible?
That's horrifying.
I know. I think it's just I think that's terrible parenting. I'm sorry.
That's traumatizing.
Yeah, and every day he'd come down there and he'd cut off a little bit more, and then the Blanky was smaller.
Give me the blanket. It's time for a snip.
How do you approach that? Like,
not well, essentially.
If you had to build a Rube Goldberg machine, what would it do?
Oh, geez. God, I guess first I'd look at my life and kind of figure out what were my annoyances, what were my inconveniences. I think I got it. So I've got dogs, and they're not big; they're small dogs. And sometimes, because I live in Chicago, sometimes it's cold and it's wet and rainy or snowy. I would love to have some sort of pulley system that I could strap them into out the window and kind of like use the ropes like they do on theater curtains and lower them to the ground, and they could go pee and poop. And then somehow I pull them back up and I never have to go outside. That would be fantastic.
So like a dog elevator.
A dog elevator is what I'm saying.
Incredible. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
This was wonderful.
You're welcome, guys. Anytime.
Where can people find you?
I will keep it simple. Just go to Daniel Kraus, KRAUS.com, and it has all my links there.
Thanks for listening to our interview with Daniel Kraus. None of this would have made it to your ears without me, the all-powerful sound guy, Mike. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at GateCrashersPod. Slide into our DMs with that sweet, sweet feedback, baby. No, but seriously, we really want to make the show as great as we possibly can. So let us know what you think. And if you're really feeling it, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It'll really help us, how do you say it?